Okay, colleagues, we should probably begin, right? There's a million things to say, as always, but let me start with a quote. Again, I cannot promise a good quote every time, I'm afraid, but I'll try. So, no, actually, before I read you the quote, let me try to give a little background as to what I'm going to try to do today. So basically, this is going to be a lecture I've never done before, which is not necessarily the best idea, because who knows where this will go. What I want to do is basically, like if you have a philosophical thesis, you should be able to explain the thesis in a short amount of time to a lay audience. This is my philosophical approach. Like, if your philosophical thesis is so complicated you cannot explain it in one class to undergraduates, then there's probably something wrong with what you're doing, philosophically speaking. So basically, this is going to be my attempt to try to give the conclusion of the course at the beginning of the course. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to go, so we'll see. So basically, okay. So we said that one of the key tasks of the course is to give an account of humanity as it fits into the naturalistic picture of the universe. So basically, this account from protons to presidents and from electrons to elections. How does the world hang together from the contemporary scientific worldview? And this contemporary scientific worldview, some terms, additional terms I need on the board. These terms would be, let's write this somewhere. So I use the word naturalism, but you could also talk about physicalism or materialism. I'm sure there are some other terms I cannot think of right now. So philosophers have this infuriating habit of drawing minute distinctions between everything. So professional philosophers will tell you that these words, naturalism, physicalism, and materialism, that they are not equivalent. I don't care, okay? For the purposes of this class, these are all one and the same. And sometimes people will talk about how, some of you might have seen, Sean Carroll talks about poetic naturalism. Or sometimes people talk about eliminative materialism. Again, these details are not important. And these three words, I will, presumably, most of the time I will be using the word naturalism. The referent, the purpose of these words is to point to what I would call the standard contemporary scientific worldview. Now, it's not one thing, but there's a certain cultural default. Like, if you switch on the television, most people who know what they're talking about will, one way or another, be fans of naturalism. Like, I don't know, if you go to YouTube, like the Green Brothers, or I don't know, Veritasium Channel, or something like Physics Girl, or PBS Spacetime. So all of these people, think of the Green Brothers, right? They're all naturalists, and they all are very much impressed by the word evolution. We'll talk about evolution today. I'll get your question in a second. Anyway, let's go back there. So the point I was trying to make is that obviously we should not oversimplify in a sense that not everybody agrees. Of course, there are huge debates. And even among the naturalists, there will be debates. People will not agree. But there's a certain broad consensus. And it's akin to a political consensus in the sense that, if you think of this in terms of Venn diagrams, so this person thinks this, that person thinks that, so everybody has a different opinion, but there's a broad overlap. This is basically what I'm driving at with this naturalism stuff. And what I'm trying to say, and I think it's an important sociological fact about 2020, is that people who are not naturalists are, and again, this is a sociological generalization, so I'm not trying to disrespect people, okay? But as far as I can tell, people who are not naturalists are either clueless and they have no idea what they're talking about, or they are very clever professional philosophers. Like, they're too smart. And that's why they invent very clever, very intricate arguments to try to get out of the standard naturalist outlook, even though this is, broadly speaking, I don't want to say dogma, but again, a broad sociological consensus. And again, I'm not saying that we should accept it at face value. Of course, I mean, So I need more space on the board. So I remind you, my 3 rules of method were Skepticism, well, actually, the first one was fallibilism. Fallibilism, skepticism, and the third one was, what was the third one? Empiricism, yeah. Anyway, you cannot read this, but don't worry too much. So, so of course, I'm a skeptic first and a naturalist second. So we have to be willing to examine our views. So we're not holding, by we I mean probably myself, I'm not holding naturalism as a religious dogma, right? So you are allowed to disagree. You are allowed, in fact, you are welcome to question it. That's how science progresses. That's how knowledge progresses in general, through dialogue and through questioning. But we have this view, and I want us to take it seriously. And like at the end of the day, I think that intellectual effort is better spent trying to understand naturalist worldview and trying to untangle the implications, work out the implications of the naturalist worldview, rather than trying to fight against it, which is, again, an option, but not the option I am sympathetic to, although some people should be doing it. Again, that's, we'll talk about some other time, or maybe today when we talk about science, people should be willing, for science to progress, people should be willing to go down paths that seem blind alleys. Like, people should be willing to think outside the box and go against the dogma. This is the only way that in the long run science can progress. Anyway, so basically, again, so my quote, and I'm still trying to get to my quote. My quote is from William Golding. Some of you said he was your favorite writer. Lord of the Flies is his most famous book, but this is from the book Darkness Visible. So the reason I want to talk about this quote is because the biggest challenge, I think, for the naturalist worldview is to give an account of human beings. Because, explaining stars and planets, explaining chemistry, or explaining even simple bacteria in mechanistic terms, that's fine. Most people are on board with that. Most people are on board that the bacteria are just machines. That does not seem to surprise people in 2020. But to think of human beings as just electrochemical engines, as just electrochemical machines, now that's more controversial, that's more interesting. So in a certain sense, what I'm trying to do today is to make some headway, make some leeway towards explaining human beings in naturalistic terms. So this is the quote. I read the book when I was approximately your age, and this quote stuck with me. By the way, the nausea quote also stuck with me since I was about your age. So anyway, so this is it's a kind of, some of you might not necessarily be impressed by this quote, but this quote has haunted me for years. So, Golding is talking about a girl. It's a young girl, about 15 years old, and her grandmother died, and she has some thoughts, anyway. Let me shut up and let Golding talk. It was at that very point that Sophie's the name of the girl. It was at that very point that Sophie made her discovery. The mystery of things, a very Heideggerian phrase, the mystery of things and her grandmother dying drove Sophie in on every side into herself. She understood something about the world. The world extended out of her head in every direction but one. And that one was secure, that direction was secure because it was her own. It was the direction through the back of the head, there, which was dark like the night, but her own dark. She knew that she stood or lay at the extreme end of this dark direction, as if she were sitting at the mouth of a tunnel and looking out into the world, whether it was dusk or dark or daylight. The dark tunnel at the back of the head. This is the metaphor I'm looking for. When she understood that the tunnel was there at the back of her head, she felt a strange kind of shiver that shot through her body and made her want to escape from it into daylight and be like everybody else. But there was no daylight. She imagined daylight then and there and filled it with people who had no tunnel at the back of their heads, gay, cheerful, ignorant people. And then she fell asleep. Anyway, so the point of this quote, the reason I bring it up, this poetic metaphor of the dark tunnel at the back of the head, because, and there's this wonderful person up here on the board, front and center. This is René Descartes. Now I'm oversimplifying Descartes, and this drawing is a caricature of Descartes. And my presentation of Descartes in this class is going to be a caricature. But Descartes is usually taken to be this champion, this pioneer of the approach according to which human beings are these free, rational agents, free, rational subjects in the world of physical, material objects. And Descartes is, an important phrase in Descartes is dualism, that there is this opposition. So, dualism. There's this opposition, duality between me and the world. Again, I am an immaterial, immortal, free soul trapped in this material body. And I think there's a certain amount of, what's that phrase, preliminary plausibility to Descartes' picture. Like most people in the street, they're Cartesians. They think, oh yeah, yes, I'm a rational, this immortal soul. I don't want to say, I'm not sure sociologically if this is most people, but certainly many people in the street think like that. And what I'm trying to say is that you need a certain shift of perspective. You need a certain lens through which to look at your own experience to understand that Cartesian picture is not quite right. And this is exactly why I like this idea of the dark tunnel. Because the important thing for Descartes is that our consciousness is transparent to us. I know what I am, and I can control myself. Sort of my thoughts are visible to me. My consciousness is visible, accessible to me, and is also controllable by me. Buddha, in the Anatta Sutra, has this interesting metaphor. He says, I am like a king, I'm like a king in my own castle. I know, I can see what goes on, and I can order things around. Well, Buddha, in the Anatta Sutra, immediately goes on to say, well, that's not true. Like, I wake up in the morning in a grumpy mood. Can I choose to cheer myself up? No. So, okay, I walk into a store, and I decide, should I buy this or should I buy that? But notice, I decide what to buy on the basis of my beliefs, values, and desires, which I do not decide upon. I've been born with these beliefs, values, and desires. And for example, rotting meat appears disgusting to me. Is it because I have chosen? Is it because of my free decision? I have decided that rotting meat should be disgusting? Or is it just, in some sense, something that my body does over and above my own control, right? So it's like a knee-jerk reaction, something that happens to me. And again, so these phrases, and I like in the following Plato, you remember the three parts of the soul, the spirited, the appetitive, and the rational, beliefs, values, and desires. So these are the things that control your behavior, control your consciousness to a very large extent. And they, in a certain, so it's as if if you try to thematize your conscious experience, it's as if there's a dark tunnel from which thoughts pop up. Like you don't control the flow of your thoughts. Certain things just come to mind. I mean, for example, I'm giving you this lecture right now. Certain ideas come to mind. Other ideas I forget. Certain associations pop up. I don't control that. So what I'm driving at is that ultimately what we're going to drive at this course with a naturalist account of human beings is the idea that humans are evolved machines. That we are, mechanical engines, if you want, somehow evolved through natural selection. And ultimately, the explanation of all of this has to be mechanistic, which is depressing to a lot of people. And in order to make that picture plausible, I need to fight against Descartes first. So if you are a Cartesian, then the evolutionary picture does not make much sense. But if you understand that Descartes is wrong in his own terms, like if you pay close attention to your own experience, you will see that you are not a free agent, a free subject, immaterial subject in the world of material objects. But in fact, as Nietzsche says, and some of you are going to do presentations on Freud today, so Nietzsche and Freud and Heidegger will point to all of these aspects of human thought, human personality, all of these aspects which we do not control. So again, Nietzsche had this metaphor. He says, consciousness thinks it's in control, but in fact, consciousness is like a rider seated on a tiger. So actually, the tiger is in control. The tiger is driving consciousness, whatever it wants. And the tiger in this context, in this Freudian Nietzschean metaphor, is the unconscious, right? The unconscious processes in your body, which are physical at the end of the day. And the writer might lie to it himself, herself, and imagine that they're actually in control. But actually, no, it's the tiger that's doing the driving. And again, it's like it's always a weird thing to try to do this in class, because I don't know how this seems to you. To me, I mean, you're listening to my lecture. I said this last Monday. You are listening to my lecture. I am listening to my lecture. Because these words, it's not like I don't have this feeling of free and conscious choice before I say every word. No, it's a certain flow. It's like, yeah, there's a tunnel, dark tunnel at the back of the head, and from it, certain, I don't even want to say thoughts. The speech comes out, and sort of, you may be surprised to hear what I'm saying. Sometimes I'm surprised to hear what I'm saying. It's basically like that. Anyway, so this was kind of a long and long-winded preamble. Let me try to be slightly more specific what I want to do today, or at least try to sort of chart the way. Because in a certain sense, teaching, I see, teaching is a little bit like being a guide in a jungle. So this is this jungle of philosophy of science, and I'm trying to show you around what's where. Anyway, so I think that if we want to understand the naturalist approach, there are three high roads. There are three basic ways that come to mind, at least to me, when I think about this. So these would be the synchronic, the diachronic, and the phenomenological. So apologies for using technical jargon. Can I rephrase this in simpler terms? Probably yes. So by synchronic, I mean, how does the picture of science hold together now? So by the synchronic approach, what I'm going to be interested in is, if you want, the unity of science. Unity of science. And we talked about this last time, how presumably we have these layers. So we begin with something like particle physics, and then the next layer is chemistry, then biology, and then above biology, well, yeah, it's psychology and social theory at the same time. Because again, as I told you last time, it's not really very prudent to separate the two, because your psychology, well, is shaped by society, and society is shaped by your psychology. And when I talk about this, an important part of your psychology is your DNA. And there are genes in your body, right? There are genes in your DNA that have been influenced by our social development. So there's natural selection, but there's also, if you want, cultural selection. And cultural selection is complicated. You have cultural types that get selected for, but also certain traits, genes, your genotype has been changed by our experience of sociality. Let's try to go back. So again, so the synchronic approach. Synchronic means right now, like architectonic, logical. How does science hold together right now? The diachronic, so synchronic in Greek means at the same time. So at this moment of time, how does science hold together? The diachronic approach, so chronos means time, right? Diachronic approach means historical. So this is historical. So this is unity of science, like at the instant, right now. And this is historical. Diachronic means historical in the sense of how did this naturalist worldview come about? Let me go back a step. Let me try to explain this in simpler terms. So I am trying to explain the naturalist worldview. One way to explain the naturalist worldview is to look at the history, and we'll talk about this in a second. Another way is to look at how it hangs together right now. So the historical approach would start with, I don't know, the ancient Greeks or the ancient Chinese and end today. And the synchronic approach begins with protons and ends with presidents. So yeah, anyway, so synchronic approach is from protons to presidents, and diachronic approach is from Thales to, I don't know, Einstein, if you want. And the phenomenological approach, is basically the approach of Martin Heidegger. We'll talk about this. Let me just push forward, and then I'll go back to this picture and I'll try to explain this. Anyway, so naturalism. We talked about naturalism last time, and so I said that naturalism was, I gave you a list of 5 things: skepticism, naturalism, mechanicism, evolution, and the problem of meaning. Well, in some sense, even though naturalism is here as opposed to supernaturalism, but in a certain sense, all of this is what I mean by contemporary naturalistic worldview, broadly speaking. And it's called naturalism because this element of naturalism is the most important of the 5, I think. Anyway, so if we approach it this way, then sort of thinking back to ancient times, very often people would talk about how Thales was the first scientist in the world. There's some controversy because people would want to say, well, maybe no, science begins in ancient India or ancient China. Now, for the purpose of this class, do your presentation on that, okay? Like, keeping in mind that this might not be the best place to start, let's start with Thales nonetheless, because this is one customary place to start. So basically what people like Thales do, again, for those of you who hear this name for the first time, so when I talk about Thales, this is ancient Greek philosophy, so-called pre-Socratic philosophy. So Thales is writing in approximately, I think, 6th century BCE, before the Common Era. So the Hebrew Bible is not yet finished. So Thales' philosophy, science, is older than the Bible in this sense. Anyway, and so what Thales does, we only have scraps of the fragments of the ancient pre-Socratic philosophers. Most of their texts are lost. But one plausible reconstruction, controversial but plausible reconstruction, is basically what they are doing is that they are saying that, first of all, the world can be explained. World is explicable. And it's not only explicable, but it's also explicable through some combination of observation and experiment. I don't know, let me write this here. So the world is explicable through some combination of observation and experiment. No, sorry, observation, experiment is the same thing. Observation or logic or reason. Logic. So by observation is experiment. And logic would be something like deduction. Well, anyway, just to get some more jargon on the board, this is usually associated with induction, and this is usually associated with deduction. And so this is we're talking about ancient times. So the world is explicable, not only explicable, but the world follows laws. So fixed, unchanging laws. And now you could say, well, okay, so what's so revolutionary about that, right? The world is explicable in terms of laws. Let's contrast this immediately. So the standard worldview, and I talked about religion last time. We could also talk about not just religion, but also, not classical Abrahamic religions, but you can also talk about ancient Greek religion, like the Olympian gods. So from the standpoint of the ancient Greek culture, you have this traditional answer, and the traditional answer was not found in the Bible. The Bible is not written yet. Remember, the Bible is a young book. Quran is even younger. But in the works of poets like Homer and Hesiod, you have a certain explanation of reality. And for Homer and Hesiod, first of all, the world is not explicable. It's inexplicable. The human mind is radically limited. Homer and Hesiod do not speak in their own names. They are prophets. They speak for the gods. The Iliad, some of you may remember, begins with the words, "Sing, goddess," and something goes after that. But the words, these first words, "Sing, goddess," is an invocation to the muses. Homer wants to say, I'm just a mortal human being. I'm just a random nobody. So I cannot tell you what the truth is, Homer. But the gods, the divinity, can speak through me, and I can be a prophet, somebody who speaks for the gods. And the basic idea is, maybe human mind is limited, but divinity has unproblematic access to the truth. And you see, since ancient times, this option is on the board. And since ancient times, people have this temptation to say, well, to hell with all your science. We'll just let God speak to us. But you see, from the very beginning of time, this is not a workable solution, because you have many different prophets, and they report different things, and there are many different religions. You see, if we lived in a different world, like imaginable world, where, for example, there was a sacred book that would project the meaning directly into your head. such that there's no controversy, no disagreement. Everybody reads the book the same way, and there's one book and everybody agrees on it. That would be a different world, but that's not the world we live in. That's not the world we live in. We have many sacred books. They disagree, and the sacred books do not interpret themselves. It's an important point. We'll talk about this some other time, but actually it's important for our class as well, because there's this problem we'll keep circling around. And in some sense, this is exactly what I wanted to do in this lecture, to lay all the cards on the table, even though this may be slightly chaotic, and some of you maybe, what's the right phrase, disoriented by too much jargon, but still, there's this idea that you cannot have a raw observation. And those of you who have taken philosophy last year will remember this from David Hume, especially from Immanuel Kant, that sort of perception is not a passive thing. There are active mechanisms of perception. So there's theory, and then there's observation. And theory informs your observation, and observation informs your theory. And there's this cycle. So when I say the Bible does not have a theory of the Bible, it's like when you open the book, there is no separate chapter that explains to you what the Bible is. Like imagine that archaeologists would have found a lost chapter, and this lost chapter would have said, my name is so and so, and I'm just writing this book for fun. This is pure fiction. That would be an example. That would be and notice immediately your theory. This observation would change your theory of the Bible. Understanding this sentence. This is purely a work of fiction. Now changes your understanding of the whole of the Bible, and then you read every sentence, every part, through a different lens. So this is a cyclical process. You could say a vicious circle, maybe, to some extent, but the observation changes your understanding of the whole thing, and the understanding changes the perspective, and then you see different things. Anyway, it's kind of complicated story. We'll be coming back to it over and over again. This is not the last time you've seen this on the board, and I haven't explained this perfectly, but that's what I'm driving at. But again, the Bible does not have a theory of the Bible. The Quran does not have a theory of the Quran. People say about the Quran that it has been written by Allah, but the Quran does not say that itself. Open the book, find the verse. There's no verse like that. So people say this about the book. The book itself does not speak for itself. Not to mention, again, I talked about this problem with translation. I say theory, but this is if you want, this is your general understanding of the whole. The best English word actually to use for this is background. Like I have a mathematical background, I can understand what is a derivative. In this sense, background like background knowledge. And part of the background would obviously be understanding the language, linguistics. So the words in the Bible are written in a different language. This language, some people speak modern Hebrew, but the ancient Hebrew is dead. We can try to reconstruct it, but we do not have any unproblematic access to the ancient Hebrew. Let me just give you one example. As a Hebrew word, I think it's alama. Does it mean virgin, or does it mean young girl? Nobody can tell you for sure. But so many people died over this question, over the years, right? So it's somebody who thinks that these questions that I bring up, they're not important. Yeah, it's like think of all the religious wars and persecutions. Anyways, again, unfortunately, the cash value of these problems is measured in human blood, is what I'm driving at. Anyway, so I'm talking about everything at the same time. But let me try to stick with my historical narrative. So I was saying that before Thales, and again, Thales is just the beginning of science in the West, right? There's a whole array of names, and which you don't need to know. Doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter. But sort of what you have before Thales, so like anti-Thales, you have this religious worldview of people like Homer and Hesiod. And they say, no, the world is inexplicable, and it does not follow fixed, unchanging laws. The world is not explicable, it is mysterious. You cannot understand what the world is about. And it doesn't follow fixed, unchanging laws, but what the world follows is the arbitrary will of the gods. Arbitrary will of the gods. Why do the seasons change? I'm slightly getting tired of giving this example every year, but whatever. It's a good example, right? So you remember in the ancient Greek myths, there's Hades, there's Demetra, and there's Persephone. So Demetra, the goddess of the earth, she has a daughter, Persephone. Her daughter is kidnapped by Hades, and complicated. Yeah. So complicated arrangement. So Demeter is the goddess of the earth, and her daughter has to spend half the year away from her, and that's why she's sulking, she's depressed and sad, and that's why you have winter. So there's nothing fixed and unchanging about that. This is arbitrary will of the gods. It just so happens that Demeter is in a bad mood. Now you could say, but there's a regularity. The winter comes at approximately the same time each year. Yes, but the regularity is explained not with the appeal to the laws, but with the appeal to an agreement, to a contract. Demeter has an arrangement with Hades that half the year Persephone spends with her, and half the year she spends with him. But this, again, it's not a question of fixed unchanging laws. It's a question of arbitrary will of the gods. And one thing that Thales is famous for, presumably, is that he has predicted a very important eclipse. Details are not important. But notice, being able to predict an eclipse in ancient times, now that's very impressive. Because you would imagine, from the standpoint of this ancient religious worldview, you would imagine that an eclipse, of course that's something that has to do with the arbitrary will of the gods. The eclipse doesn't happen regularly. It doesn't happen, every month or even every year. Something horrible must have happened so that the gods are really angry, so angry that they have blotted out the sun, right? So this is the traditional religious explanation in terms of the arbitrary will. And Thales, presumably through some primitive form of astronomy, being able to predict the moon is blocking the sun, and that's why he's able to predict the approximate date of the eclipse. How approximate, that's a controversial point, but still. This shows that maybe the world at bottom is not this arbitrary place, arbitrary and mysterious place populated by gods and demons, but maybe actually things can be explained in naturalistic terms. Something like that. So this is Thales. So then I have what I have on the board is Ptolemy. So I could write Plato instead of Ptolemy or Plotinus, but Ptolemy probably, for the purposes of explaining science, is slightly more appropriate. So what Ptolemy says, what Ptolemy does is, Ptolemy is the ancient Greek astronomer, like Hellenistic astronomer. He works in Alexandria, so this is after conquest of Alexander the Great. So basically what I'm going to talk about now is this transition from Ptolemy to Copernicus, and this is going to be a hugely important, maybe the most important idea in all of the course. Well, I said that evolution is the most important idea. Well, evolution is important because it feeds into this idea. So it's kind of, it's two sides of the same coin. So we have the teleological and the mechanistic worldview. So Ptolemy is the champion of the teleological approach. So the Greek word telos means aim or purpose or goal. And the idea of the teleological approach is that the universe at bottom is a deeply rational place. So in ancient times, there were many options on the table, and you had. So I'm going to talk about mechanistic approach. Mechanistic approach is talked about this last time. So associated with Immanuel Kant's phrase, "the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter." Der Schlund des zwecklosen Chaos der Materie. That the world is the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter, according to the mechanistic worldview, not the teleological worldview. So on the mechanistic picture, you have causes, but what you do not have are reasons. And what you do not have also are, you do not have good moral reasons. Well, anyway, so on the teleological approach, it's like you have something at the top. And this something, Ptolemy was a Neoplatonic philosopher, among other things. So the Neoplatonists called this the One. This is the famous idea of the good from Plato's Republic. So obviously, later, monotheistic tradition would interpret this as God. But you should not jump to conclusions. Do the Neoplatonists, when they talk about the One, do they mean the same thing as God? Well, let me just give you one example why we should be cautious of using that phrase. One is more like an abstract mathematical concept. It's like the idea of ideas. And the One is certainly, in a deep sense, responsible for the world, for the Neoplatonists. The world overflows from the One. By the way, when they say One, they also kind of mean the number one. Anyway, kinda does a lot of work in the sentence. Anyway, so even though there's kind of something like creation, if you want, it's not real creation. The word that they use is emanation, because the one doesn't care about the world. The one is perfect and enclosed in itself. The one doesn't need the world, doesn't care about the world. The world is a byproduct of the activity of the one. And incidentally, one other aspect of this is that you cannot pray to the one. And you cannot hope that one will care about you. Now, of course, Neoplatonist philosophers would expect that you would admire the one and love the one and contemplate the one as the source of the harmony and the beauty of the universe, but you cannot expect the one to love you back. The same way you cannot expect the number one to love you back. Or, like you have a mathematical equation and it's beautiful and harmonious and you admire it, but you don't expect the equation to admire you back. Right? So it's this kind of a difference. So, and above the one, and in this, Plato had something going with Pythagoras. So Pythagoreans actually worshipped the number one, the mathematical number one. So Plato was exposed to the Pythagorean tendency. So without going into a lot of details, let me just hint at this possible Pythagorean arithmetical connection, and then sort of you have some kind of a realm of perfection, perfection up here, and in the realm of perfection you have this kind of ladder, and towards the top maybe you have lesser gods. Because Ptolemy was didn't have any problem with Olympian polytheism. Okay, there's Zeus and Athena and Aphrodite. These are all aspects, maybe, or lesser aspects of the one. Why not? So below that, you would have, and this is getting tangible. This is getting important. You have celestial bodies. So let me write planets here. Not just planets, but planets and stars. Planets and stars. And below all of this, there is the imperfect world of change, and this is our world. And at the bottom of this ladder, towards the very end, you have matter, which is dead. And somewhere between the planets and matter is you and me. So humans. Or I should say, not humans, because for the Neoplatonists, you're not one thing. You are two things. You are an immortal soul trapped in a mortal material body. So I should say human souls. And the human souls occupy this halfway house. We have something, an element of this higher perfection, but we're also trapped in this world of matter. And so the idea is that there's a natural hierarchy in the cosmos. This is the natural scale of goodness and perfection. And the idea behind this picture is that you should strive to go up. And again, within this picture, good things are objectively defined. Like it may be hard to decide what to do in a given particular situation, but there is an objective standard of right and wrong. And part of the importance of this picture was to show that the planets and stars exhibit this mathematical perfection. And so what Ptolemy's astronomy, Ptolemaic astronomy, some of you might know this, it was the geocentric model of the solar system. Part of what Ptolemy was about is by using a system of circles called epicycles. Some of you may want to look this up. So by using a system of circles, he wanted to track the motions of the planets. You see, if you think about this for 5 seconds, we know that Mars is not orbiting the Earth, right? Mars is orbiting the center of mass of the solar system, which is 99.9%, the sun. It's not, technically speaking, it's not correct to say that the sun is center of the solar system. There's a center of mass of the solar system, and the sun approximates that to a very, very high degree of precision. But still, the idea is that Mars, because it orbits not around the Earth, but around the sun, if you actually plot Mars' trajectory from the Earth, it doesn't look like a perfect circle. And of course, you know that the orbits are elliptical even. And so what you need to do is you need to imagine, so what Ptolemy did is he had this system of circles. So he would imagine a circle. On it, he would put another circle. On it, maybe another circle. And you can, so all of these have to be perfect circles, but you can vary the sizes of the circles, and you can vary the speeds of rotation. Mathematicians among you will recognize this. I mean, because trying to decompose a motion into these sine waves, this is called in mathematics something transform. No? Fourier transform. Exactly. This is Fourier transform. You can do this. You know, there's a mathematical formula that proves that any trajectory you give, it doesn't really matter. Any trajectory you give to me, I can decompose it into an infinite series, you know, with infinite precision into these this kind of a system. Right now, this is known as Fourier transform. But Ptolemy, of course, was doing this for the first time, and he was acting on the conviction that something like this must be true. So basically, when we get to Copernicus, this is when the system starts to break down. So basically, what you take, it's not like Copernicus has disproven the whole system and proven that there's no God and there's no meaning to human life. No. He just took, it's like, you think of this, stacking puzzles, like Jenga or something, Uno, whatever you call that, and you pull a block from the middle, right, and the whole thing falls down. This is what Copernicus started doing, because what he questioned is the perfection of the motions of the planets and the stars. And as soon as this goes out, this whole picture gradually collapses. So basically, this system evolves through stages. So what I wrote here is Copernicus, from Copernicus to Newton. So there's Copernicus, there's Galileo, there's Tycho Brahe, and there's Newton. So ultimately, I guess what we want at the very end, what we get to, sort of skipping through stages, is we get the Newton's formula. F equals m1 multiplied by m2 divided by r squared multiplied by constant g. You see, this is very different from this kind of a worldview. Because within this worldview, there's a natural hierarchy. Good things are up there, bad things are down here. You have perfection there, you have imperfection here. Gods are up there, and mortals are here. This formula does not discriminate. You see, so m1 may be the moon, and m2 may be me, my body. So the motion of the moon affects my body, and the motion of my body affects the moon. It's kind of a silly example, but you know, if you're feeling adventurous, do this next time. You know, so just walk around the room like this, and your parents come up to you and say, what are you doing? And you say, I am affecting the motion of the moon. See, no, but you got to understand, all astronomers, or I don't want to say all, but most astronomers of ancient times were also astrologers. There was this notion that the planets are more perfect, and the planets influence what goes on down here, right? But you know, within this formula, first of all, there's nothing perfect about the motions of the planets. They are ellipsoid with imperfections, and the orbits change constantly. You understand this, right? Number one. And number two, everything affects everything. It's not like the moon affects me, but I don't affect the moon. Yeah, the moon is heavier, it's more massive, but it's not more perfect. It's not more good. It's just bigger. And there's nothing necessary. It's like, you know, if bigger means better, does it mean that people who have more mass, like, you know, I don't know. Let me not go there. Okay, apologies. So this let's say, like, if you associate mass with goodness, this would lead to some very strange ethical conclusions, I would say. Anyway, so and notice also within this picture, chaos is a problem. Disorder is a problem. The biggest issue for this picture, I would say, is the problem of evil. If the universe at bottom is a rational place directed towards some kind of natural goal, why is there evil in the universe? Why are children born with cancer? Why? Why does good God allow children to be born with cancer? Now,
why gods are good?
Well, this is the presupposition of the story. If the gods are bad, you will move over to this side. Or if the gods are bad or morally neutral. But this was the presupposition of the story. Now, within this story, the explanation was kind of disconcerting because, Christians, Jews, Muslims, and other religions, Hindu traditions, they have certain ways of trying to explain how evil is possible if God is good. But for these guys, it was slightly simpler because they said, well, one doesn't care about you. There's a natural hierarchy in the universe. You were unlucky to be born in this lowly place, so it just happens. But there's a possibility of moving upwards. So they had, in some sense, that was their solution to the problem of evil, which was not necessarily very satisfying, but still, I think it made a certain amount of sense. So, but chaos and evil are a problem on this view. On this view, order is a problem, because if the universe at bottom is chaotic, again, the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter, why is there order? Why is it that this room is so stable? And this table, since the beginning of this lecture, has not yet disintegrated. What keeps it together? Right? And this is genuinely a problem, because if you think of if you meditate on this formula, you will realize that the orbits of the planets cannot be stable. That's like impossibly miraculous. And in fact, I think Newton already understood that if you let the clock run into the future, one of the two things will happen: either the planets will fly apart, or they will collapse together on themselves. Because in this formula, there's nothing that guarantees the circular orbits or elliptical orbits of the planets into the indefinite future. And this is the problem. At some point, I think I should draw this picture, but of course, you will remember. So we have the increasing entropy and the parabolic complexity. But and this would be, so if this is time, this is entropy and complexity. But the point towards which we're headed, if we're willing to trust our best cosmological models right now, is precisely the point of perfect chaos. Like nothing interesting is going to happen. All energy in the universe will dissipate. The black holes will evaporate through Hawking radiation, and there will be nothing. There will just be quantum foam. Particle-antiparticle pairs, in this slow dance, coming into existence and annihilating themselves into eternity. Nothing interesting would happen. Just bubbles on the froth.
The energy is transformed into another energy. That's like the law of physics.
I'm tempted. Well, anyway, so first of all, energy is not conserved in contemporary cosmology. That's a problem, but let's not talk about that right now. But on this picture, the state of maximum entropy, called the heat death of the universe, energy is not lost. Energy is dissipated. It is maximally dissipated. It is so dissipated that there are no people, there are no bacteria, there are no molecules, even there are no atoms. There's not enough energy to even keep atoms together. So the only thing you have is just this quantum froth, as people talk about. If we're willing to trust this equation, who knows? Who knows if we should trust it or not? But what I'm driving at is that this is what contemporary cosmology says, and this is something that was immediately already apparent to Newton. The problem of order, that we are living in somehow a special place. Like throughout the history of the universe, most time is not interesting. Most time is inhospitable to life. Like, interesting analogy, like most of space is uninhabitable. Like if you think of most of the observable universe, in most places you simply cannot live spatially. Same way with time. Most times you cannot live. So you need a very special place in space and time. And this is where complexity can evolve. And this is you and me. But the ultimate point, and this is at least one name on the board. Heraclitus, wonderful ancient Greek philosopher. Heraclitus provides, I think, a basic motto for this view of the universe. Heraclitus says, yes, there is stability, but this stability is not really a real stability. It is just a temporary truce, a temporary deadlock. The only reason why things seem to persist into the future, the only reason why there's continuity, is because you have a harmony of opposing tensions, like a stalemate. His image is of a drawn bow, Naturalism, look. Right? You take a bow and you draw it, and it seems stable, but actually it's nothing but stable. It is in deep tension. And the moment that something changes, let's say the string snaps, the bow will explode or something like that, right? So, on this picture, the whole universe is like that. Things exist from moment to moment only because they are forced into existence from moment to moment. And in general, there's nothing necessarily stable about this into the future. I should not do this because this is going to be a colossal waste of time, and I'm going to fail at this. So I'm not going to draw the Feynman diagram, even though I tried to practice during summer. But sort of, if you think of something very simple, like an atom, like a hydrogen atom. So you have a proton and you have an electron, and what happens is you have a dance. Like according to quantum field theory, do you know why the hydrogen atom is stable? Is because they exchange a virtual photon. So a proton I'm not even sure how often, but this formula will tell you how often. Maybe, let's say, a zeptosecond. Who knows? You don't know what that is. I don't know either. So every zeptosecond, a proton sends a photon to the electron, and the electron sends a photon back. The photons are the mediators of the electromagnetic force. And through this intricate dance, sort of, in some sense, if you want, every moment the proton pulls on the electron, and the electron pulls back on the proton. And as soon as this as long as this continues, you have an atom. But this image is exactly the image of a drawn bow. There's this harmony of opposing tensions. And there are other forces that, there are forces that are trying to bring the electron closer, and there are forces that are pulling them apart. So it's, this complicated and intricate dance. But like there is no stability. There's just temporary truce. And the way that Heraclitus expressed this is in a wonderful phrase in Greek. Polemos pater panton. War is the father and the king of all. Everything, the whole universe, if you want, is at war with itself. Everything is at war with itself. And sort of to bring this metaphor closer to home, I am standing in front of you, but actually, all of the cells in my body are secretly at war with themselves. And it's only because I have this dictatorship sitting in my brain, which is capable of, through the immune system, of policing all of the cells in my body, forcing them to behave. That's the only reason I can give you a lecture. But as soon as the dictatorial measures that my central nervous system exerts over or immune system exerts over the body, as soon as that weakens, the whole body disintegrates and collapses, something like that. So this was my move from Copernicus to Newton. I hope that you can appreciate the force of the argument. I hope there's something interesting in that. And this was obviously the beginning of the disintegration of the teleological picture. But people always find a way to cling to this because this is so comfortable. And this is a problem. Wishful thinking. I think that sort of, do I have a knockdown argument against this picture? No. There are people today, there are philosophers today. The most brilliant of them is probably Thomas Nagel, who still holds to this picture. So it's a lot of brilliant minds today who try to work. You remember I said that everybody who's not a naturalist today either are clueless or too smart. Well, Thomas Nagel falls into the category of too smart. You can make this picture work today. My personal opinion is that it's not necessarily the best use of our time, but I certainly hope that some people like Nagel do pursue that because only through dialogue can science progress. But still, what I'm driving at, is that, you see, if this is your worldview, you have to be suspicious because we are all psychologically motivated towards something like this worldview. On this worldview, the world makes sense. The world is our home. If you have a splinter in your toe or a pimple on your forehead, this is because, let's say, God willed it directly, and everything is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. If your, beloved cat, Jupiter forbid, dies in a car accident or something like this, this is for the greater good. God planned it, and God will redeem your poor cat, something like that. Right? Sorry for giving these heart-wrenching examples, but this is what I'm driving at. So sort of we should be suspicious of this picture, even in the absence of arguments against it. The first argument was from Copernicus to Newton, challenging the notion of the harmony of the celestial spheres. The second big stage was Darwin, because Kant, writing between Newton and Darwin, says, Kant has this famous phrase. He says, there will never be a Newton for a blade of grass. There will never be a Newton for a blade of grass. So basically, Kant said, okay, take your harmony of the celestial spheres, but you will never be able to write a formula that will explain how living things work. Well, unfortunately for Kant, here comes Darwin and provides a plausible explanation, plausible mechanism of how, basically, how can you have something like a Newtonian theory of the blade of grass? And I should probably note, just to be fair, evolutionary story was always on the table. So ever since the time of Thales, you have these ancient philosophers writing before Socrates, people like Empedocles, for example, or Democritus, who, broadly speaking, subscribe to the evolutionary theory. Empedocles has this picture. He says, sort of, you had the primordial, no gods, for Empedocles, no gods, just random jumbling of particles. You have this primordial chaos, and out of this primordial chaos, everything that can form forms. Like, I don't know, you can have creatures like you and me, but you can also have, I don't know, an eye with 15 legs, or, I don't know, cows with branches instead of limbs. Sort of any kind of monstrosity imaginable comes out of this primordial chaos. And Empedocles says, well, most of them will not be fit to survive They will not be able to feed themselves. They will not be able to reproduce themselves. So they will all die. So you just generate this huge random array, and the only things that will survive are the ones that sort of are approximately attuned to this world. So the Darwinian option was on the table since very ancient times, but it wasn't plausible. It wasn't plausible. And Aristotle confronts it directly. Aristotle says, when I look around, this world is far too orderly to be explicable through this random chaos. So what you needed, among other things, let me just mention one thing. I think one thing that you need is the discovery of geology and geological time, the understanding that life has existed on planet Earth literally for billions of years. This is something that was unavailable to Aristotle. He did not have the fossil record. So what I'm saying is that Darwin is this, he's like a mascot for this picture, but actually, it's like there were people before him and after him who were maybe more important, but sort of whatever. We'll give him credit. Some people are upset and say that we should probably talk about Darwin Wallace. I don't know. Okay, just to be fair to Wallace, there was another guy who discovered natural selection at the time of Darwin. So just to be politically correct, let's say Darwin Wallace. I don't know. I'm not here to adjudicate ancient debates. So this was the story. But of course, now this is going to be less important, and I'm not going to go into so much detail about this. But into the 20th century, you had the view which was called Vitalism. And these were people who have read Darwin, who understood Darwin, but said, look, your picture is incomplete, and probably you need some kind of a mysterious, miraculous force, like Bergson's Elan Vital, or for example, was it Droysen, somebody? Hans Drisch, I think, yeah, talks about entelechi, using Aristotelian term, that there's a certain purposefulness to organisms which cannot be explained mechanistically. Well, we all know how this happened. Sorry, we all know how the story ended. Vitalism went out the window when DNA was discovered. And again, beyond a shadow of a doubt, now we understand that at bottom, life is just chemistry. Yeah, so the DNA molecule is very complex, it's very spectacular, but it is purely a mechanical engine. Like at bottom, it is there's absolutely nothing mysterious. So the degree of complexity is very high, so it's hard to wrap your mind around the complexity. But the principle is very, very simple. And to be fair, I have to mention there's the last bastion of the teleological worldview, and this is the talking of consciousness, something called the hard problem of consciousness. I'm so happy to have programmers in the room. The Turing test, John Searle, Chinese room, right? So all of this problem, the so-called hard problem of consciousness. So I should lay this up front. The problem of consciousness is the biggest unsolved problem of the naturalist worldview. So this is indeed like nobody really has a solution. So like if you want to attack naturalism, this is the best angle of attack. However, I have to tell you that for all sorts of reasons, I'm not really optimistic about this angle of attack. And the most important reason, and sort of kind of, I don't know, let me go back to this picture. So I wanted to say, look, naturalism is this wonderful thing. First of all, I can tell you a historical story. This is the historical story. This is a diachronic story, okay, on this side of the board. This is diachronic. We talked about this story. Hopefully makes some sense. The synchronic story is what I tried to allude to last time, and I kind of keep mentioning how you go from physics to chemistry to biology to psychology, that kind of thing. But the third idea is this phenomenological. So you have people like Searle or like Hubert Dreyfus. They would say, look, consciousness cannot be explained in simple computational terms, even though, you see, it's interesting. People are tempted, of course, to do this, because how can you explain consciousness in mechanistic terms? Yeah, I can explain. I'm making robots who behave like humans, and for a lot of people, that's enough. Well, again, if you want to be pedantic, it's not as simple. And there's all sorts of things that humans can do that robots cannot do so far. And there's a big question: will they be able to do this? Yes or no? I don't want to go into this debate. I want to approach this from a different side. I want to approach this from a completely different side. And this is why I have my third angle, the phenomenological angle. So one way to understand contemporary scientific picture is to read the history books. Another is to read something like Sean Carroll's book, which is going to be my synchronic picture. But the third way to understand the contemporary naturalistic worldview is just to close your eyes and to meditate on your own experience. And again, I wake up this morning, and from this dark tunnel, the quote I began with, all sorts of things bubble up. Like, was this really my free conscious choice to come here to this class? So what I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, if you pay attention closely to what you are doing, the vast majority of your actions, of your decisions, even of the things that you say, are unconscious, beyond your conscious control. Your body takes over. And if this is true, if Freud is correct, if Heidegger is correct, it doesn't matter that we cannot solve the hard problem of consciousness, because consciousness doesn't make a difference. It just goes along for the ride. And okay, yeah. At the end of the day, you walk into a store, and you have a Coca-Cola and a Pepsi-Cola, something like that. So the most important choice of your life. So you look at them, you make the decision, but this is like such a small proportion of your life, and like this, free choice in the moment. Most things you do in life do not involve that. People are going to get upset, and I probably should control myself. But let me just give this one example. Like you're going to graduate, and many of you will go on to continue your education. Like this decision to continue your education, this decision to choose, for example, a school, or maybe choosing a romantic partner, choosing to get married, or choosing to have children. Is it going to be this moment of choice, like Jean-Paul Sartre or like Nietzsche? You stand in front of the abyss, and you say, will I do it? Will I not do it? What I'm driving at is that most of the time, for most people, it's not like that. You want to go to a school, which is like this is like obvious choice. This I have to do this. There are overwhelming reasons on so many angles. This is the best school that will accept me. This is my best plan of life. I'm just going ahead. It's not a matter of choice. For my choices will not like that. Or likewise, if you're getting married, you don't want this to be like a decision. Should I marry that person? Should I not marry that person? Like ideally, you should be so in love, so sort of synchronized, etc., etc. Like not a single cloud in the sky. Like this should not be a choice. Yes, of course, I want to marry this person. How could you ask? And etc., etc. And sort of so much in our lives is like this. And when you ask, okay, Alex, but if it's not choice, what do you explain this by? Well, okay, I explain this through the beliefs, values, and desires which you get from your DNA and from your culture. Why have you chosen ISEF? Well, or why have you chosen High School of Economics? Well, because it's a prestigious university. Why do you want to go into a prestigious university? Because you're going to earn a lot of money. Why do you want to earn a lot of money? Because my culture tells me that earning a lot of money is a good thing. Is this your matter of your conscious choice? No. It's a question of what your culture does. And in the second half of this course, we're going to talk about a plausible explanation as to why culture does these things in mechanistic language. So basically, you have natural selection that will explain your DNA and will explain your individual psychology. And we're also going to have cultural selection. For example, cultures that transition to capitalism and emphasize earning money are more efficient at producing weapons and outcompeting militarily cultures that don't. It's an oversimplified explanation, obviously. So the whole story is more complicated than that, but this is like a bare bones, like a proof, as computer people say, proof of concept. I can give you something like a bare minimum of like a semblance of an explanation of how this could work in principle. By the way, I feel a certain restlessness. When do we end? How much time do we have? Ah, wonderful. Okay, I have to apologize because I'm kind of, with this kind of schedule, it's not like, did I talk? Well, okay, I talked about this, 1, 2, 3, and this was the most important stuff. Okay, I remind you that Sean Carroll is the patron saint of this course. Let's sort of a customary prayer offered to him. So anyway, people, I honestly wanted to leave some time for your questions, but I need to get adjusted to this kind of schedule. Anyway, colleagues, I hope this was fun. I hope this gives you some food for thought. If you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer. Otherwise, thank you so much. I'll see you in the seminars. Thank you.